I'm sure anyone else that's going to join us will just jump on in. So kia ora koutou, thank you for joining us this morning. For those that don't know, Marama and I are cousins, and currently working on mahi at our marae, which has just been amazing this last couple of months, but I've been not talking anymore in case it's something she's going to share. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Marama.
Tēnā tātou. Kai tūhoi tātanga maha ki Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Wairere, ngā iwi, ko Marama Salsano ahau. So I'm a kai Rangahau matua here at Te Manawa Haukura. I have a PhD in creative writing from Victoria University that was conferred last month. I also have a master's in creative writing and another master's in Māori cultural studies or tikanga Māori from Waikato University. And I've taught high school English for nearly a decade, but it's lovely to be here at Te Wānanga Aotearoa. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about disseminating rangahau through creative writing. And on screen is a photo of our marae. So Heidi and I are working on a rangahau project to write a book for our marae when she reopens in 2027. So this photo I took a couple of years ago now before Cyclone Gabrielle. She doesn't quite look like this anymore, but she'll be moving to less flood-prone land, and hopefully in 2027 we'll also have a puka puka to go with the move, to talk about the move. So there's a QR code on screen as well, which is just a little blog that I started, another way to disseminate our creative writing. And it's just about our move. So today I'm going to be talking about a few things. I thought I'd talk about what I mean by creative writing and why writing is in inverted commas in the title. And then I wanted to share some stories about some of the creative writing and the intertwinedness of it all from my PhD. Then I'd like to talk about an aspect of my creative process and then give an example of a whakapapa thread of creative writing and why it's really important that we publish our creative work. And then I want to finish with some creative inspiration kind of opportunities that are currently open / coming up before we move into welcoming an incredible guest speaker before she leaves Aotearoa to take up a postdoc position at Northwestern University. And then we'll end with questions. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Right, are we going to work? Why are you not working? Here we go. Okay, so creative writing. In Hirini Melbourne's foundational essay about Māori literature, he wrote this quote on scene. So the ancient Māori were surrounded by writing in their daily life, the carvings on posts and houses, the marks on cloaks, the very architecture of the great meeting houses, the fact that texts, compositions, speeches, ritual replies, and so forth were memorized, not written down, does not mean that the ancient Māori inhabited a world from which writing was absent. It was a world in which a variety of forms, written and oral, gave vivid and complex expression to a culture. I really love this essay by Hirini Melbourne, and he does kind of at the end talk about how the future of Māori writing does not lie in Pākehā forms. As someone whose first language was Te Reo Pākehā, I take that on the chin, and I am still working towards being able to write creatively in Te Reo Māori. But in the meantime, it's important that we share our stories, because if we don't, who else will? And that's rhetorical, because it will be the same people who continue to write about and on us. Right. So when I talk about writing, I mean all of these things. And I guess you'll see what I mean by writing in the next few slides. So some of the things that I included in my PhD were banners. They were poems, aspects of different protests, zines, and lots of collaboration. So the land back banner that you can see on screen in two different parts, I created that in 2023, in October 2023, while I was at an Indigenous visual arts residency at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity in Canada. So it was a 4-week residency. And for the longest time, this banner was really just a bit of a duvet that I just hung on the wall. I didn't know what to do with her, and I had her on there for about 3.5 weeks. And it was only the last week where I kind of realized what she was supposed to be. So the banner's made from gifted and thrifted materials. Some of them contain ribbons that were from another artist who was there, and lots of gifts, I guess, from other people. So when I got back to Aotearoa, I took 2 months off from my PhD. I suspended for 2 months, went to Canada, went to Banff, went to Vancouver and hung out with some very cool Indigenous people there. And when I came back and was back on board with my PhD in December, I tried to get back into writing, and it was quite difficult, having focused for a long time on just connecting with cool people and doing lots of visual things. So the way that I got back into writing for my PhD was to write the poem Wahine. And I might read the first part of it. So it's split into 4 parts. The first part talks specifically about the banner, and it was me thinking about what the root of me is, what is the seed of my being, like why do I exist, kind of all of those existential things. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the banner. So if you can see in the banner, it was supposed to be flipped the other way around. So there was ground and then there was sky up the top, and I flipped it. While I was making the banner as well, I was gifted some sacred ochre that was collected from the Kootenay National Park. So there are streaks of that ochre all over it, as well as the ribbons that were used in various canvases that came from another Indigenous artist there. So this is part 1 of the poem Wahine that I wrote in December 2023. The seed of me is a tangle of fibrous roots, stitching land-back banners and tino flags to urban landscapes. Roots hook over and under land, crocheting pockets of pohine into social media. The seed of me cyber connects whenua to whenua and whenua to whenua to whenua. The root of me is sacred yellow ochre, stained like blood across a torn duvet sheet, then flipped upside down so earth becomes sky and sky becomes earth. Wahine harvest uku amidst the stars, catch planets in oceans and grow poetry from the land. The root of me is a mess of coloured ribbons, fashioned into kupu that speak to wahine desires. Indigibabis want land back, yes, but sacred sites and rights also. Tribal autonomy and body justice too. Justice for incarcerated bodies, justice so the throats and ears and skin of our mokopuna only ever feel our languages. I paint words onto my duvet in tani for blood. The kupu speak of wahi ne, of generational codes extending across time and space, of body sovereignty and body decolonization in progress, always in progress, because we don't have lifetimes to erase patriarchy scars. Instead, why Māori is our medicine and our memory, and our whenua holds the genetic DNA of us all. So that's part 1 of the poem I wrote in December 2023. The following year, early in 2024, Mere and I were approached to write a collaborative article, which is in the Journal of the Polynesian Society, and it was about our respective creative practice, doctoral journeys, / our residencies that we were on. So I was writing about the Indigenous Visual Arts residency in Canada, and at the same time, Mere was writing about her Creative New Zealand, Creative Australia digital residency as well. So into that article, I included the banner, I wrote about the banner, and I also included the poem Wahine. Last year, 2024, I also decided to put the poem into this zine called Wahine. Let's carry on. And zines are a fabulous resource. They are mana motuhake publishing in its finest form. So you can publish your works in zines. There's a QR code on screen where you can request your own ISBN number. I think up to 99 copies. You just have to send the National Library one. And it's a great way to get your work out. And as well as that, the banner was used in various protests. I've also used the banner as a blanket on the plane. I've worn her as a scarf. So there are lots of kind of intermingling, I guess, of both the words and the things that I create in my PhD, but also on the daily. So that kind of brings me to talking about books and scratch cards and sculptures and blackout essays and banners and more collaboration. So while I was at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, I met a couple of wahine there, and they decided they wanted to write this book about Indigenous visual poetry, and they invited me and some others to submit some work. So I submitted a couple of banners. One of them is on screen, the Toitu Te Whenua, Toitu Te Wahine banner. I also submitted a visual essay, which was like a blackout kind of poem based on an essay that I'd written for the International Indigenous Research Conference. I just kind of made a poem out of it. So page 1 is there. It's actually 4 pages long. And after I submitted, they asked me to be an editor for the book, which of course I did. And when I was thinking about all of these incredible, beautiful, amazing Indigenous visual poems that had come into us, I found it difficult to kind of figure out what to write in the foreword of the book. So for me, the only option was to use my hands. And so I made this sculpture that kind of represented a lot of the themes or the things that I was seeing across the board. So the sculpture is right next to the foreword in our book. As well as that, again, collaborating with Mere and our very good friend Hawea Apiata, we wrote as well a short article that was really kind of a question-answer sort of talanoa between us, a bit of a wānanga, about how we use Indigenous languages in our visual poetry. So for Mere, it was using Rotiman language. For Hawea in particular, he writes bilingual poetry, so it was him talking about that, and me talking about the sprinkling that I use in my own poetry. There is a QR code on screen that will take you to the article that we wrote together. Astra, the publisher of the book, kindly let us publish it so that other people can read it as well, and it's not just contained in the book. And one of the last things that we did as part of this book project was to create some scratch card poems. So in front of the book that's on screen, there are some little scratch card poems about the elements. We decided the book is called To Feel the Earth as One's Skin, an anthology of Indigenous visual poetry. So the title comes from a poem by Cecilia Vaikuna, and so we created some poems, some scratch card poems as well as that. And this is some more recent I wanted to talk about how, even though I did a lot of these things in my PhD, it continues to like resonate in a lot of the work that I did. So the whenua banner that's on the screen is one of the banners that is in our anthology of visual poetry. I also wore her to the March for Nature up in Auckland in 2024. And she also features as an Instagram post poem in my zine Wahine as well. There are lots of ways that you can just reimagine and create amazing poetry. So she's in there. And as well as that, last month, I went to the Australian Association for Pacific Studies conference in Sydney, and I talked about the future is fat, as an FPHAT, representational justice by reading Indigenous fatness in literature. The PHAT really just shows my age. That's all. It was just a funny thing I added. But it was kind of great to think differently about how we view fatness in literature written by Indigenous people. So thinking about what we do. And creative processes. So one of my go-to creative processes, if I'm trying to figure something out, is to do art. I need to do something with my hands. And for all of my PhD, a lot of the time it was returning to these upoko whakairo paintings. So most of them are acrylic with sand. In there, some of them I think is some uku, some harvested pigments that I made. But for me, it was thinking about whatever I was struggling with at the time, and it was thinking about ngā atua and how they could help me to kind of navigate what I was going through. So a lot of these are taramainoku became quite important during my PhD. Hine nui te pō, of course, is important. And there are others in there. Tipuna is in there, parawhenua mea, hine ukurangi, and so on. Last week in Shelley's workshop, I talked a little bit about the banner that's there. So the banner kōrero kōrero, I created to sum up my PhD. I needed a way to visually talk about what my PhD was kind of about. And hine nui te pō, as our queer, as a keeper of my tauranga as well. She was kind of the one person that I kept returning to, because she reminded me about the ways that we traditionally learnt in Te Ao Māori. So through observation, through our eyes, through thinking, and also through the kōrero that we did, and it's how we gained our mātauranga Māori. But as well as that, it's not just painting. As you can see in there, I made tote bags and stickers and lots of different things. But for me, there is, even though I am a writer, and writing and reading has always been my go-to, so too is Toi Māori. So making and creating things is also what I love to do. A whakapapa thread of creative writing. So I really wanted to stress how important it is that we write these creative things, because we never know how they're going to land with people, and we never know the journeys that they will take. So in the book 250 Ways to Start an Essay About Captain Cook by Professor Alice Tupunga Somerville, she literally kind of lists these 250 sort of prompts and ways that you could start an essay about Captain Cook. But of course, they're more than that. They're very critical, very searing, wonderful ways to think about settler colonialism and the arrival of Captain Cook, I guess. So from this book, we have this incredible article by Tara McAllister called 50 Reasons Why There Are No Māori in Your Science Department. And Tara specifically says in the article that she was inspired by reading Alice's 250 Ways. And from this, I have on screen Teresa Polly. So Teresa was a master's student at the time, I think, and she's a friend. So I did ask for her permission to talk about her. But she wrote this incredible conference presentation where she talked about 30 hopes that she has for the engineering industry. So she was one of very few engineers, wahine Māori engineers who came through. And from that single conference presentation, she's had so many opportunities to move into different spaces where she can help Māori in particular and Indigenous people who are trying to navigate the engineering space. So she works in industry, and as well as that, at the moment, she is also helping a university to work on their curriculum specifically so that it is supportive of Māori. And I don't think that Alice thought that her book would have like that much of an impact down the line, but this is why it's so important. And even though all three of these are a book, a journal article, and a conference presentation are kind of what we think about when we think about, academic traditional research outputs, you can also do these same things in a really creative and beautiful way. And I think that this particular whakapapa thread of creative writing really shows us the impacts and why it is important that we write and continue to write. So I'm going to leave you, before I hand over to Mere, some creative inspiration here. So currently underway is the Toitu He Kāinga poetry competition. It's about Māori relationships with the built environment that is being spearheaded by one of our colleagues, James Bergen. And I would encourage you all to get your poems, however you want to write poetry, get them and submit them. There are prizes, $500 for the best poem in Te Reo Māori, $500 for the best poem in Te Reo Pākehā, and there are also some runner-up prizes as well. Again, the QR codes are there. Sign up. Speaking of poetry, we also have the Poetry Month Wānanga Styles coming up in August. So if you want to maybe practice writing some poetry and want to come along to a place where you can do just that, that's happening in August. So the 1st of August will be just me talking very briefly about some really cool poems that I like and different styles of writing that might resonate or may not with you. On the 8th, we have an incredible Reo Māori Anake session with Te Aho Marama, Fairhill, with Tūtaka Ngāhau Williams and Te Mihinga Kōmene. So they'll be running that. They'll be talking about creative writing in particular, poetry and also translation, all in Te Reo Māori. The following week, I'll be doing a little bit about, we'll be doing some writing workshops. And then on National Poetry Day on the 22nd of August, it'll be an open mic. So you can write your poems and then come along and read them. And the last one, we're just doing a bit of a debrief, and there'll be some kaimahi who'll be reflecting on some of the poetry that the Wānanga has published as well. So that's coming up in August, and also coming up in November for all of my Indigenous Masters, PhD and early career researchers. There will be a wānanga held out at Mangatoa Pā from the 21st to the 23rd of November. Kaimahi, that means that you can apply for funding to get there. I don't think it costs a lot. But you can still apply for funding to come along and really just meet up with other cool Indigenous people who are, and learn about all of their kaupapa whilst also sharing some of your kaupapa. So I'm going to leave you all with that, and I'm going to hand over to the beautiful, amazing, incredible Dr. Mere Taito. So I'll do a tiny introduction and then Mere can introduce herself. But Dr. Mere Taito, she's a poetry, flash fiction, and short story writer and scholar of Rotuman heritage, who's based in Kirikiriroa in Hamilton. And last year, alongside David Eggleton and Vaughan Rapatana, Mere edited the book Katui Vei, an amazing collection of contemporary Pacifica poetry from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I will hand over to you, Mere. I'll try and stop sharing my screen so that you can. Right. How do I do this, Heidi? Do I just close? No. Yes.
Oyexian, Maya Maori, thank you so much, Marama. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to speak to you. Marama and I first met Marama during the beginning of our PhD, which was around 2021. And we have come through this process. It was tumultuous in the beginning, but eventually we found joy when we left our first places of study and distributed ourselves all over Aotearoa. So it's been fabulous working with Marama the last 3 years, and we have learned so much from her. In our group, we call her the creative goddess, and she is one of those people in the group who can hammer out 1,500 words in minutes. I mean, that's how she writes. So we've been very inspired by Marama and her creative work. So thank you for inviting me to talk to you, Marama, and to the whole group. So before I launch in it, let me just try sharing my screen again. You know, I've never used Google Meet, so I had a little practice, and sometimes when the digital things don't go right, it can be quite annoying. So let me try again how to share. Select a window, here we go, share. Can you see that? Is that all? Is that, can you all see that? Yep.
Yep, it's working.
Okay. So today, rather than creating a PowerPoint presentation, I wanted to talk to you from the repository where all the digital archival multivisual poetry sits. And it currently sits in a software called Articulate Storyline. And just before I talk about this genre of poetry, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. And while I'm doing that, you can actually see the different functionalities of the tool that I have used. So my research was reading archival text and writing. Wait for this. It's writing multilingual, archival, digital, visual poetry from reading archival texts. So I wanted to look at the process, the transmedial process from the archival reading to the multilingual, archival, digital, visual poetry writing. So because it's such a long phrase, I cut it down to archidigivispo. So the archival text that I read during my PhD was 3 different types, but 4 different texts in total. So I read all of them a missionary text. I read a periodical newsletter called Rongorongo, which is the only text published on the island of Rotuma in the early 1900s. I read a collection of Rotuman Hanuchu, a Rotuman story. There are 18 stories in this collection, but I could only work on 4. And then I read my grandfather's autobiographical text that he wrote when he returned from Australia in the mid-1940s to record his missionary experience with the indigenous Aboriginal people. For each particular text, because they were so different in form, and because my relationship with these texts was so different, it became clear to me that the way that I approached each text had to be different, and they were different. For example, this one here, Tales of a Lonely Island, this was my grandmother all over. My grandmother was such an inspiration in this research, because my grandmother brought the Rutuman language into our lives through the telling of Rutuman stories. And so whenever I read this, I thought of my grandmother. My grandmother was all over the process of my reading of the 4 stories that I selected in this text. I chose 4, and when I started the reading, I found that because the book is structured in such a way where you have the Rutuman language version, and after the Rutuman language version, you have the English language version. So what I found myself doing is I was cheating. I was cheat reading. I was constantly jumping to the English language version when I could have just read the Rutuman language version itself and try to figure out the meaning by myself. And so because I felt like this reading was not going well, I took a scissors. I picked up a pair of scissors and I cut the Rutuman version away from the English version, and I relocated the stories into my A3 art book. And I call this method the untrapment method, because the scissors actually untrapped the Rutuman language version, severed the Rutuman language versions away from the English version. And the impact on the writing was so pronounced. I mean, the scissors work in archival text is so strong that it showed very clearly in the digital writing. With Rongorongo, oh my goodness, Rongorongo, when I started off reading Rongorongo, I hated it. I wanted to change Rongo. I didn't like Rongorongo. Rongorongo is written in non-standardized Rutuman. It is a monolingual newsletter. But that wasn't the problem. The problem with Rongorongo was it was very British Empire stroking. There were some places in there that were so condescending to the Rutuman people that I wanted to throw it out, shred it. I didn't want to read it. But you know, I had to stop, and I had to say to myself that every text, there are good things in the text, and then there are bad things in the text. So I had to change my approach. I had to read wide. I had to read all the 276 entries and read them on their own merit. And so even that had such a profound impact on the writing. And this method is what I call the panoramic surface method. It is reading wide, like a panorama, and it is reading along the grain on the surface. And I was really inspired by Alice Tupunga Somerville's approach to her reading of Te Ahau. And I took a lot of her approaches from the reading of the Māori magazine into the reading of Rongorongo. But this was my favorite. Reading my grandfather's biographical text was my favorite. It was such an emotional reading for me. I read my grandfather's text like a ruin. So when my grandfather came back from Australia, he not only wrote 2 texts, but he built our family home in Wato and called it Milingimbi. Milingimbi is the name of the island that he served in the Crocodile Group of Islands. So I studied the ruin together with my dad. We both went to Rutuma to have a look at the ruins. We studied the ruins together, and I found features of the ruin that I could apply to his autobiographical text. This was such an emotional process for me, because I got to work very closely with my dad. He is an engineer by profession. He has architectural skills, and he is one of 2 people alive who lived at Milingimbi and who actually, as a little boy, helped to build Milingimbi. So it was really special to work with him, to actually ask him, and I did ask him to please lay out his memory of Milingimbi in the form of a drawing. So his drawing, his plan, his architectural plan of Milingimbi became such an important design feature of the poems that I wrote in response to this reading. Reading these 2 texts was also very important, because it showed clearly to me how indigenous genealogical, intergenerational research was so important and so rich. Here were 3 different generations working together in the future. There was my grandfather and his texts, my father and his memories of Milingimbi, and there was me, the researcher, the creative writer, the poetry person, and the 3 of us worked together to read these texts and create a selection of poetry from them. I used in total 6 different types of digital tools: Canva Pro, Hazine, Articulate Rise. Articulate Rise is what you are looking at right now. It is the platform, the repository in which all the poems are kept. I used Articulate Storyline, Anconk, and Camtasia. And all of them, all of these different tools provided different functionalities in the writing of Akidigi Visbo. In the reading, found, which was so profound for me, Rutuman writers that I had never heard of. Some of them, especially from Rongorongo, there were a number of writers that were initialized. I didn't know who they were, and I think there's a research gap here. And I call these writers, like Alice Tipunga Somerville in her analysis, the new nets of Rutuman writing. There were writers that I found by name that we had never heard of before. John Fatiaki Imosirima was such an integral part of the writing, Semesi Turutuma. I focused on Mesilama Titufunua, not on Churchword. And somebody asked me, you know, the book is actually 2 people, the translator, the missionary Churchword, and Mesilame Titifonua. And I said to them, well, hello, my project is Indigenous, and I'm focusing only on the Indigenous Rutuman writers, not on the foreign anthropologist or translator. This is entirely Rutuman, focused on Rutuman writers. And of course, there was my grandfather, which I absolutely loved working on in this PhD journey. I mapped out the process because I wanted, because I designed the PhD in such a process that I wanted it to be very reflexive. I had to keep a journal and figure out and try and map out the process from archival reading to digital writing. And this is what I came up with. Right at the center, which is actually not the center, is the archival source, the ancestor medium. But there were 2 important things that I learned by mapping out the process. One, even though the archival text was the ancestor medium, it was not the authority, meaning it was not tyrannical. There were other things going on. The archival text would trigger memories, immaterial factors outside of the text. So a lot of things were drawn from outside the archival text into the writing. In the beginning, I wanted to find out what were the constraints and enablers in the transmedial process from archival reading to digital writing. And I found that the constraints and enablers were not clear-cut. There was no binary in between. And this is what I mean. What presented itself as a constraint or as a problem immediately turned and became an enabler. And what presented itself as an enabler immediately turned and became a constraint. So I was going through, swinging from constraints to enabler. But I think that is what made the research exciting, because sometimes it wasn't clear what was making me write and what was preventing me from writing. In tracing the process, I also traced the trajectory of creation. And yes, I use spreadsheets. In a literary creative project, I brought the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was so important for me to actually trace as well the trajectory of writing. And for each poem, it was important for me to write the medium pathway for each poem. And if you look up at this diagram, some poems had 4 pathways marked in orange, and some poems had 3 pathways marked in teal. My supervisors, as sharp as they are, asked me this question, which I thought was very important for me to answer. Why was I making the effort to make the process clear? Why was I making the effort to map out the medium pathways and the trajectories of creation? And this was my answer. When we talk about Indigenous research as being transparent, this is how to show transparency. This is how to map out the process and show transparency. When we talk about Indigenous research as being generous, this was my way of being generous. I was thinking of the future Rutuman scholar who will come along maybe 5 years, 10 years down the road, and who is interested in doing digital storytelling. I'm thinking that my work could be the place where he or she could start, not to reduplicate the work, but also to take my work and create something even bigger and more beautiful. So this is why I took the time to map out the trajectories, to map out the pathways, and to map out the process. I was thinking of the future. This was my way of giving back to future Indigenous creative Rutuman scholars, or any Indigenous creative scholar for that matter. The whole process created poetry that was so different and varied, and they all reflected the type of archival text that they were drawn from. And I will give you some examples here. In the beginning, I talked about the scissors. The scissors work showed itself in poems like "This is Not a Toy." I forgot to tell you that I positioned the collection of poetry as a way of supporting Rutuman language regeneration in the diaspora. Rutuman language is considered vulnerable, so this was a way of supporting this work with multilingual poetry. So let me just talk about the functionality. With Articulate Storyline, I really enjoyed this functionality of Articulate Storyline, because when you are writing for language, when you are writing to teach language, you need to not only read, but you also need to hear the sound. So this functionality of Articulate Storyline was beautiful in that I could record the pronunciation of Rutuman words, as well as show the word next to the sound. But I'm going to take a leaf out of Marama's book and actually read you this poem without the hot spots there. This is not a toy. This is the sound of relentless interrogation in present tense. Kate si sister. Where is the scissors? Kasi ta what sissy sister? Who has taken the scissors? Ka eta what sissy sister? Did you take the scissors? Katesta rea my sister. What are you doing with the scissors? Kasi ta yaso falinga la atakwa sister. Who whispered in your ears to touch the scissors? It always stands to reason that a missing pair of scissors is a dangerous one. A fringe can lose its innocence. What did you do to your hair? An upholstered armrest slashed at the wrist. What's this? Kaseta mutse senofata. Who cut the chair? Oh, did I lose that? Sorry. Who cut the chair? And magazine covers shredded at the edges like paper-thin skin. Did you cut my book? No one suspects the adult cutting out mole maps, perforating birth words, snipping makeover nouns in the future. So this is what happened to me when I used the scissors to cut the Rutuman version away from the English version. It triggered language memory. It triggered the way that I would hear the language of the scissors when I was growing up, remembering how the adults during my childhood would talk about the scissors. And, you know, the scissors was something that we were not allowed to touch. The language of scissors use, I remembered, was a language of censor. And I was able to bring the structure of language, the question stem, into this poem, all from cutting the archival text. The cutting, the method, triggered memory. I hadn't even started reading it, but the act of priming the text created this poem. When my grandmother died, my aunts in Australia told me that I could take whatever I wanted from her personal archives. And guess what? This is what I found. This is a photo of me in the 1970s in Vatukola, standing next to our Honda Civic at that time. Look at my hair. You can see the fringe. I was cutting my hair as a child. And so this is archival evidence to align with my memory of scissors making. I was so pleased to find this photo, because then this made this very clear to me. When you're reading archival text, the archival text will trigger memory. That memory is a rich source of creative inspiration. I want to show you a photo of my grandmother, because she was so instrumental here in the writing of this collection. And I hope you can see that. So, you know, Marama showed Alice's book of 250 ways to write an essay on cook. And this was my cook poem, where I celebrate my grandmother's life as a cook and as a traveler. And this is called I Know a Cook. And I wrote this in a number of media, from Ganford Pro into Hazine, and then into the repository Articulate Rise. It's a flip book. You have sounds here that you can hear me reading, or if you don't want the sounds, you can read it yourself. These are the Rutuman words that I drew out of Mesalama Titiwhanua's stories. The art of cooking, the koua, and this was important for me to represent in the poem. The koua is a practice for men, but I place my grandmother here as someone who can also make the koua, the earth oven. When I went to Brisbane after my grandmother's death, passing, I found her ID card, and on her ID card was the word cook. And I cried finding this, because I said, oh my God, this is my grandmother. She loves to cook. Cooking is rampant throughout the stories from Mesalama Titiwhanua's work. And so I've used her here as a final visual in this poem, not only to represent her history and her life of travel, but also to say, I'm a woman, but hell, I can do the earthen oven too. The poems in this section were very, very colorful and very flamboyant, and there was so much color. I really enjoyed writing this. This one here, this is again, you see the impact of scissors work. I was using cutout letters. I created gift box of poems, concrete poems with an interactive element there, where the reader could actually hear these words in the gift box. The gift box changed in color and in look based on the people that I was writing for. This is for my whangai, Lapuke, who is also going through a Rutuman language journey himself. These are the words that I gifted in this gift box to him. In this reading, I also found so many names of Atua that I didn't even know. And I'm saying, oh my God. If I don't know these names, my nieces and nephews won't know these names. So I created many poems with Atua names and made them flip-like, focusing here on the single person possessive and ending it here with a different kind of single person possessive. So this is what the poems in Tales of a Lonely Island looks like. When you come to Rongorongo, the poems look very different because of the way that I've read Rongorongo. the color, the physical look of Rongorongo had such an important impact on the way that the poems looked at the end. Rongorongo is actually a very small newsletter. It is in between an A5 and an A6 size. So the poems came out I made the poems very small and used the accordion functionality in articulate rise to show this. So the poems are hidden in these layers. Here, so for Rongorongo, I wanted the past to talk to the future. So I created postcards and telegrams as a way of the past talking to the future. Importing sounds like this. Having a wave to create rest time or in between when the future responds in postcard. So this is a telegram from the past and a response from the future in postcard form. So these were what the poems in Rongorongo actually look like, very small, by telegram and by postcards. Milingimbi, writing to Milingimbi was such a pleasure, as I mentioned earlier, because I was working with my father, and this was really, truly a collaborative thing between my dad and I and my grandfather. So my dad's, as I mentioned earlier, my dad's design became such an important part of the interface where readers enter to access the poems.
Six in Milingimbi, a walkabout Milingimbi.
I used articulate storyline here. I found that articulate storyline, out of all the tools that I used, was more helpful because it had a stronger interactive component to it. So here I positioned the poems as many ways to approach an ancestral home. When my dad drew the plans of Milingimbi, he put boundaries around Milingimbi. But in actual fact, when you visit Milingimbi, the ruin, there are no boundaries. We don't have fences. You can enter Milingimbi from anywhere, from any point, whether the side, the front, or from the beach area. This is the beach area that is not actually seen here. But the poems are hidden here. And I wanted to show non-linearity. I wanted the reader to start reading from anywhere, not the traditional form of reading a book from the cover to cover. No, the reader here can either start from the Crocs, the bare feet, or the jandal. So the poems are hidden in the ruins, and you don't know what poems you will read depending on whether you enter. But there is a particular entrance into the ruin where you see all the poems together, but the reader does not know that. The reader will only access that when they know. So this is all the 25 poems, everything, everyone, all at once together, which I have placed in the ruin. And the placing of the poems is very strategic to the structure of the ruins. All the water poems that had water elements, I placed them close to the water tanks. All poems that had something to do with the garden, I placed them in the open spaces. Revenge poems, I placed them close to the pit toilet. There were pillow talk poems, love poems between my grandmother and my grandfather, and I placed it in their sleeping area. So the structure of my dad's drawings had an impact on where I placed the poems in the ruins. So you can always go back. If you start from here, you will see the mission boys are coming for you. So in my grandfather's text, he had a very complex relationship with the mission boys. He was friend, he was ally, but he was also missionary as well as a colonial agent. So I could see him, I'm reading my grandfather's text, he was moving from these different selves in his autobiographical text, which I think made the autobiographical text very rich. So to access the poems, you just simply click on that, listen to the poems, pause, stop, or exit. out of the poems. And so all the poems are designed this way. So the one important aspect of the multilingual nature of the poems in my grandfather's texts, my grandfather spoke 3 languages: English, Rotuman, and Aboriginal Northern Territory Pidgin. So not only was I writing in English, I was also writing in Rotuman, and I was also using some of my grandfather's Northern Territory Aboriginal Pidgin in these poems. To conclude, I want to say that this project, this research has changed my life. And, you know, Marama talked about in the beginning of our presentation, what is writing? Such a good question, because this project really turned everything I knew about writing on its head. I mean, what is writing, right? It's not just putting black marks on a white page. It's so many different things. It's making marks on cloth, tapa. It is multimedia. It is multi-genre. And this research project brought me so much joy. And I think I'll stop on the note of joy. Minaka. Thank you.
Oh, ngā mihi miru. I'm always so blown away by your scholarship, and I'm just so happy that we managed to get you before you skedaddle off to Turtle Island. I thought I'd open it up to questions if anyone had any questions for Mere or I. Now would be a great time. And Heidi, I think, is monitoring the chat. Kia ora, Ripikia.
Kia ora, kia ora tātou,
Kia
kia ora Marama, kia ora Mere. Oh my gosh, I just wanted to say thank you. What a stunning, and I'm just really touched, moved and inspired by you guys sharing. Well, like I just can't say enough about just being blown away, like the beauty, the inspiration, everything, and not like, wow, I just feel like I've had a tour into like a whole new world. And yeah, just really want to thank you. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, these ladies need to do workshops in schools and for, you know, get this stuff out into the world, because, oh yeah, stunning. Thank you.
Oh, ngā mihi. I appreciate that so much. Yes, workshops would be so cool. If we had time, maybe at Matawananga, that would have been cool to do that. Maybe
Yes,
we'll have a stealthy little workshop somewhere while we're all at one Matawananga. Oh, kia ora, Alex.
Tēnā taita katoa, e mihi ana ke a korua. Vena ka wakaleu Mere. I think Rupikia really hit it on the spot. Like, I just so hyped. Like, I think the words of Tarangati, I'm so hyped. I'm just like, yes, this is so cool, yelling at my screen. And so yeah, it was just, I guess for me, like, you know, for someone so young in the Rangahau space, I'm always constantly trying to find ways of how to decolonize the space of research. And not only that, but to move away from academic papers. As I shared last week of my Rangahau, my not quite part-time, but more of a whakaro is for Mere. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work about your papa's legacy, and just seeing the generational collaboration with your father as well. I'm actually doing this with my own grandfather. He's still living, and so it's a bit of a living whakapapa at the moment, and he's getting to like the early stages of forgetfulness, not quite dementia, and he was a big pinnacle in the Presbyterian religion here in New Zealand, and helping to establish and spread the word in our PIPC churches. And so trying to capture that story and that part of him. And when you spoke about how archival stories tend to trigger memories, it was very much that. I was back in Rara with my papa, and you know, him telling his Pākehā boss when he was 17 that he was quitting his job at the radio station doing the Morse code telegrams. You know, I was standing there with him and telling him that he was quitting, and he was jumping on the SS Mariposa to come to Auckland, New Zealand. So it was just really cool to hear that this is not new, but to see it coming to life and to see it in such different forms. And so again, I've taken it as a tohu from my own tipuna to say, yes, this path that you're walking with your papa is the right one, and these are different ways of how you can do it with him, and how special is it that I get to do it with him while he's still alive. So e mihi noi kia korua, and Marama, I've dusting off the old pens and pencils with my poetry writing, so I'll be in next month's workshops as well. But big mihi to you both.
And in response to you, Alex, I want to say, oh my God, treasure this research time with your grandfather. Did you say your grandfather?
Yes.
Treasure it. Oh, soak up his memories. Walk with his memories, and I wish you all the best in your research journey. And I think this memory is something that people find as unreliable. Oh no, there's so much richness in memory, and it's our responsibility as people now to grab it quickly, you know, and hold it close to you before it goes. So well done.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Whitney. Did you
Kia ora.
whakatau?
Kia ora tātou. Just to reiterate what has already been shared, tēnā kōrua, thank you for sharing your mātauranga with us. My question is it's for both of you, I guess. It's more around, did you come around the how you decided to go down this path, I think? Like, how did you know that you wanted to, one, I guess, become academics or researchers, or how did you come into it? I guess that's probably where I'm interested about. Yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Whitney. That's a really cool question. I feel like I kind of fell into it, if I'm really honest. So I was teaching high school English for the longest time. And during my teaching, we got like free papers if we had student teachers in our classrooms. So I started doing a master's in education just because, oh, well, they were free papers. Cool. And it wasn't until I came to do the thesis for that, and I found that for me, I wasn't gelling with education at the time. So in that master's degree, I tried twice to finish my thesis, and I just couldn't do it. And so I decided, I don't care. I'm just going to give up. I can't do this. It's too hard. I don't understand what people want from me. It's not what I want to do. And it wasn't until some friend said, "Oh, come meet this amazing wahine over in Māori studies," and it happened to be Alice Te Punga Somerville. And from that, it was like meeting the right people and who kind of got you, but also she just let me do whatever I needed to do the masters that I wanted to do. And because of that experience, I decided to quit teaching and stay with her to continue my PhD. But if you'd asked me a couple of years earlier, I definitely would not have been wanting to continue to PhD at all. But that was kind of my journey. And then I just met really cool people like Mere. So I was like, yeah, this is me. What about you, Mere?
You know, I had confessions when I was back in Fiji before I came to Aotearoa. I had a plan. I was saying to myself, I'm going to finish my undergrad this year, and I'm going to finish my master's here, and I'm going to finish my PhD here. None of which went according to plan. I finished my master's late in my 30s, and then I entered the PhD space late in my 40s. So I'm actually, you know, by whatever you want to call normals. But I know nothing went according to plan, but I think a lot of things started to fall into place when I migrated to Aotearoa in 2007. I think somewhere deep in my gut, I knew I wanted to go further, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to do for 3 years. When I moved to Aotearoa in 2007, so many things happened to me. My creative writing portfolio, I just started producing more creative work. I started paying more attention to Indigenous storytelling. And then, like Marama, I met Alice Tapunga Somerville in 2018, around that time. And I remember going, you know, because Alice at the time was doing the project Writing the New World, and that project, Writing the New World, really, really spoke to me, and I was able to see the connections between archival text and language regeneration. So one day, I went to Alice Tapunga Somerville, knocked on her door with 2 muffins to please ask her to listen to me and all my PhD plans. And so Alice, I mean, to her incredible generosity, sat down and visualized a possible pathway for me to take if I wanted to take the PhD further. And then, of course, yes, meeting the likes of Marama and other Indigenous women who were doing fantastic things. And there was no going back for me. But it never started off the way I planned.
Thank you for sharing those your experiences. I really appreciate it. I do have another kind of follow-up question. How did you find navigating the writing world? I mean that with respect, you know, as brown women who are mature students, when it's navigating those kinds of spaces. I was just having a nosy at the Waikato Uni Masters of Professional Writing page, and the Tawira student portfolios they have on there, the profiles, are all Pākehā young, like, you know.
Yeah. I think I've said to a few people before that we need a Masters in Creative Writing here at Te Wānanga Aotearoa.
Kia ora.
We really need that. So having been through 2 programs, 2 creative writing programs at Victoria University, it's difficult for Indigenous people, especially if you're the only brown person in the room and you're having to explain basic things / having your work read in a way that it wasn't meant to be read, or it's super difficult. And I think part of what Mere and I both do, as well as a lot of others, is to try to work together to find different spaces for our writing. So hence the zines and hence the collaboration. I think one of the super important things is to find your people, to find a supervisor who gets you, and to find other people to work alongside who just get you. So that when you are going into these archival spaces or other spaces that are not where you typically wouldn't find Māori people, that you have a brown cohort with you, for want of a better word, who have your back. We generally always travel in packs. So if we're going to conferences, if we're going to archives, we will travel in a pack. And I think that's super important to find your people. Hey, Mere.
Totally, totally. Everything Marama said. For me, when I started, especially the reading and the relationship between text and self and reading and writing, I got very angry with the way that we have been teaching reading in universities. I got very angry with the way that we have been teaching reading support to students in university. And it was because I was noticing, reflecting, observing the way I was reading. And I said to myself, bloody hell, we do not read the way they say we read. We as Indigenous people, when we come to text, we bring our whole bodies, everything with us to a text. And so our reading is not only just make the main point, notes of the main points, find the main arguments, use the Cornell method. We don't even do those things. We read differently. We read with our families. We read together. We read out loud. So I actually got very angry. Very angry. And, you know, before I started the PhD, I was in the Student Support Center of Tertiary Teaching Reading, where we work with students on the academic skills. And one of the things we work with is reading. And I'm saying, bloody hell, all of those things we were teaching them is rubbish. We don't even talk about the effective impacts of reading. We don't even do any of these things with students because we're so pressured to say, just get the main points. How? Reading is not only just getting the main points. Reading is listening to how your body is reacting to the text you are reading. And writing is not only writing a paragraph with a topic sentence, and writing is so different for an Indigenous person, you know, in this space. So Whitney, I got so angry. I got so angry with institutions and the way they were supporting students. And I thought, what Marama said, we actually need a course. We actually need a course on Indigenous focused reading and Indigenous focused writing.
Oh, did we have another question, Bradley, or comment?
Tēnā tātou. Hopefully this pātai isn't too broad, but for those of us who may want to present our rangahau in such a creative way, what are some 101 considerations we need to know with regards to protecting the knowledge, the stories, the artifacts, the culture?
Oh, that's a super cool question.
Very good question. Very good question.
Yeah. I think for me, if it's not a story that you don't want in the public domain, then I would make that zine or whatever it is for whānau. Yeah. So if it's something that's important to be, and you want it to be out in the public, because once it's out there, you know, it kind of takes on a life of its own. It can be used in university courses or in different ways that you maybe didn't envisage. But if it, yeah, I would just keep it. I would think about your audience, like what you want to say and who your audience is, and then go from there, I guess. Mere?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because that's something that I'm now beginning to think about very, very seriously now that I've created this creative work. How open do I want it to be? Or do I want to restrict it to just the Rotuman community? Or do I want it to be totally Creative Commons kind of a thing? And because, you know, my dad's work is in there. It's a very personal thing. But then again, if this work is positioned to support Rotuman language generation in the diaspora all over the world, what does that mean for me? So these are certainly very important questions and things that I'm actually grappling through with now. I'm soon to make contact with the National Library of New Zealand and to see how they can keep this work, but with restricted access and not total access. So definitely good questions to talk about. And if you're using AI, Oh my God. Restrict, 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 restrict. Know your boundaries with AI. Know what you want AI to do and not do. So I think that's important, but such a good question. Something I'm working through now. Inaka Bradley. Oh, I just want to acknowledge Bradley as part of my whānau. We have family connection, so it's really, really, really wonderful to see him here. I got a shock when I saw him, but of course I shouldn't have been shocked.
Doing my final questions from anyone before we finish for the session.
Maybe perhaps just the final comment.
No.
Um,
Just really